Alright, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rechakwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone, who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations unto the Akim, I heard pushing this gospel in truth and in sincerity to the best of their ability, given to them by Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. This is Brother Quanah Watt from the Arizona Great Millstone Camp. Come back at you, Lord will, with the edifying lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. And this is going to be a quick testimony of something that happened, just a couple evenings ago. It was actually right as the sun was going down. My wife, or just before the sun was going down, my wife had, headed out to, the store just down the street, a few minutes, man. And, she did her thing. And, as she was walking out, she noticed a dude kind of sitting in her car, door open. She got in her car, and, by the time she actually hit the road and, got out of the, the store parking lot, she noticed that the dude was following her, and, when you look at, the state of Arizona, right, is the #1 state, for drug, and sex trafficking, in the United States, and, while she, ultimately peeped that the dude was following her, she ultimately called me, and he followed her all the way back to, our home. And, I was waiting outside. By the time they got there, I addressed the dude, and whatnot. The Wadi Al Shai definitely could have been a lot worse, than what it was. Dude ultimately skirted off, pretty quickly, but the scriptures say, matter of fact, I'll grab it right now. In Matthew, the 24th chapter, the 12th verse, it says, "And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold." And, as we, the days go on, this world is getting more and more wicked, right? More and more evil, right? So things like this, such as, this drug and sex trafficking of, women and children, is going to definitely increase, right? It's going to increase a whole hell of a lot, because again, we're coming into a time, of trouble, right? Jumping up to verse 8, it says, "All these are the beginning of sorrow." So the time that's coming, is going to be far worse than what we're seeing now, which I do want to jump back to Jeremiah, the 30th chapter, and I'll start at verse 5, right? It says, "For thus saith Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushua, we have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, and not of peace," right? And we're not in the time, for peace, man, right? We're in a time where, again, this same, precept that we're reading, right? Verse 7, right, is going to come to pass, right? The hour of temptation, Revelations 3 and 10, we're in these times, man. Shit is about to get real bad, right? Verse 6, it says, "Ask ye now and see whether a man doth travail with child," and a man cannot have children, A man cannot have children, right? Contrary to, what the world ultimately says, right? Especially here in America, right? You got Transformers and Moles and whatnot, they make the statement that a man can have no, man, right? A man, can impregnate a woman, but a woman or a man cannot be impregnated. Only a woman can bear children, right? So it says, "Wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins as a woman in travail, and all faces are turned into paleness," meaning they're going to be in a position of straits, right? And this is speaking of the average man, right? So how much more the women, right, which are going to be a major target, in the times to come, right? It says, "Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it." No time in history, right, that you read about, going back to, reading in the Josephus about, 70 AD, where, women were eating their children and whatnot, and all these different, the famine that hit, none of these different accounts that we read about, right, throughout history and all the history books, mainly in the Bible, but, all throughout the history books and whatnot, right, are going to be compared to the time that is coming, Nothing. It says, then none is like it, right? It says, even the time of Jacob's trouble. We know that the word Jacob, the name Jacob, right, is synonymous with Israel, right? Genesis 35:10, he got his name changed to Israel, So it's just speaking, right, that speaking of the straits that the Israelites are going to be put in here soon, right? And we understand that it's going to be real soon, right? You got, Trump and his administration, ultimately sending out, National Guard troops, to different, major cities, right? Chicago, DC, right? LA, which are predominantly cities, man, and he's sending in the National Guard and saying, hey, we got to get rid of, drugs and violence, right? Crime and so on and so forth, or illegals, which Esau, has ultimately for decades, man, has painted Jake, as the ones who commit most of the crime, the ones who commit, most of the drug use and mass killings and so on and so forth, right? Which we know, right? We know that Esau Edom is the one that does all those things, man, right? But as the scriptures say, right, in Revelations 12:10, right, thy accuser of thy brethren, right? Esau is, putting us at the forefront of all these different problems, that are taking place here in America, so that way he can, ultimately, be justified in coming up against us, right? Which is ultimately prophecy, man. It's prophesied that he would ultimately make war, right, with the nation of Israel, right, pursuant to Revelations 12:17. These are the times that we're in, man, right? So really just prophecy playing out, man, right? And again, right, as we're reading, right, the average male is going to be in straits, but how much more you women, how much more you women, man, right? Because we're looking at, the prophecy of Second Esdras, the 15th chapter, beginning at the 16th verse, as it says right here, for there shall be sedition among men and invading one another, right? You see prices going up, right? And then I was watching the beginning part of the Elder Damashapot, out there in Indianapolis, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's where he's at. He was doing a video, of the vintage shall fail me, and showing, right, in an article and the videos that 2 million Americans are going to be without food stamps within the next week, and a lot of the those who have food stamps are these women, man, especially the so-called black women, main ones that have these food stamps and whatnot, man, right? So a lot of you women are going to be, in straits, man, which is where that, that precept comes, right, in Isaiah the 32nd chapter, rise up, you women that are at ease, a lot of you women are going to be in straits in the times to come, food prices are going up, right? Wages are staying the same. If they might go up, 0.5% or maybe $1, but it's really nothing, man. And soon there's gonna be, rioting and whatnot, in the streets, which is gonna call for what the full, declaration of martial law, right? Which is gonna ultimately allow for military members to be put on these streets, and when the military goes in, to a place, whatever the military does, it's ultimately swept under the rug, man. So not only you're going to be dealing with the average people, right, that are going to be, coming in, stealing stuff from these stores and whatnot. You're going to be dealing with the military members as well, man. Right, verse 16, for there shall be sedition among men and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes, in the course of their actions shall stand in their power. So they're not going to give a fuck, man. They're not going to care. They're not going to give a fuck about, the police, the military, They're not going to care about any of that, man. Which we already see some of that to a certain degree. You had those, you know, the protest in, California, the LA, in LA with the, the ICE immigration, immigration and whatnot. You even had over in the Bay Area, right, San Francisco. They were, this is actually like a year or two ago. They were ravaging these damn stores, man. Even going back to, just after or during the lockdown, the scamdemic, hey, they were doing that shit too, right? But how much more they're gonna do it when the time, when everything starts to get even more worse than it is now, And again, right, martial law is gonna be declared, right? We're already seeing, a soft martial law, if you will, right, being implemented with military members being put in these different cities, Right now it's just National Guard, but soon it's going to be, the full-fledged military, man. Marines, Army, so on and so forth. And they're going to set up roadblocks and, a curfew. And that's why you get verse 17, a man shall desire to go into a city, shall not be able, It's going to be bad out here. Verse 18, for because of their pride, the city shall be troubled. The houses shall be destroyed, and men shall be afraid. Right? We just read that. Right, in Jeremiah the 30th chapter, right, men, right, an average man is going to be, which we're talking about. We're not talking about a men of the Lord, right? Because, men of the Lord, Yahweh Shem El Shai is ultimately, going to protect those that truly believe, right? Those men, their families, right? The, the women that ultimately, get with that man, because we know Isaiah 4:1, right, where 7 women shall take hold of one man is coming as well. Right, so those women that the Lord ultimately guides to that man of the Lord, they're going to be good too. But again, the average man, right, is going to be in straits. Well, how much more, right? The average woman out here, man, right? It's going to be bad, right? It's in verse 19. A man shall have no pity upon his neighbor, meaning they're not going to have any mercy, man. It says, but shall destroy their houses with the sword, meaning the gun, right? And spoil their goods because of the lack of bread and for great tribulation. Again, a lot of you women are going to be, on the receiving end of, this judgment that's coming. Isaiah 13 and verse 16, it says, their children also shall be dashed to pieces before their eyes. So, you might be hearing all these different commotions and whatnot that's going on outside, people, because, there's been a lot of visions, in dreams and one like that of the impending doom that's coming, man, by these everyday average people. Brothers have been posting videos, videos been circulating amongst the body, of people having these different dreams, and especially women, right, just saying, hey, they look outside and it's crazy out there, man. So it might happen one day, you might wake up, because Jake like to fucking sleep late as shit and whatnot, man, You might wake up, middle of the day and it's fucking all chaos outside, man. You might grab your kids, and run into, a hiding spot or whatnot. Somebody kicks open your doors, and then they end up finding you and your kids. They might take your kids, kill your kids real quick, and steal your food, steal your, your water, right? While they're doing this, right? And then at the same time, they might come get you. Right? It says their children also shall be dashed to pieces before their eyes. Their houses shall be spoiled and their wives ravished. So a lot of you women, right, are going to be ravished. I got this word ravish right here on the long line etymology. It says to seize someone by force, or it's like to seize someone by violence, right? Carry away. It says a person, especially a woman, right? So you women are going to be in a very bad case, man. You got, again, Arizona is the number one, sex and drug trafficking state in all of America. How much worse is it gonna be? When all hell breaks loose and they've defunded the police. They've sat here and cut off, or reduced, the task force, if you will, right, of the police, and say, hey, you got to call this non-emergency line. I know they did that here in Arizona. If you got a serious, and it's still ongoing, right? If you got a serious, crime happening or whatnot, it has to be, basically murder in order for a cop to show up. But if it's a little petty crime or whatnot, hey, these cops ain't gonna show up, man. You might get one of them, assistant cops, just there to assist. They like part-time, they really can't do nothing, they fat, You might get one of them, man. How much more, how much worse is it gonna be when all hell breaks loose and these cops are gonna go and protect their own homes? You ain't gonna have no cops that come, help you, right? The phone lines are gonna be down. When you look at this word down, dropping down, it says what? Commit grape upon. So a lot of you women, right, are gonna be graped in these times, man. And for a lot of you women, that's your worst nightmare. Ain't what the Lord said He's gonna bring your worst fears upon you, pursuing Isaiah 66 and verse 4. He's gonna choose your delusions and bring your fears upon you. And that's ultimately because a lot of you women are evil, right? Are wicked, And like I said, Tawadi Yahweh Shemel Shai, the situation, right, that happened with my wife definitely could have been a lot worse, but had she not, ultimately had, a man of the Lord to be there with her and been alone or whatnot, or been a single woman, she very well could have been, carried off, man, and this could have happened unto her, which is going to happen unto majority of you women out here, right? Especially you Israelite women, you so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native American, especially the so-called black women, man, the most wicked of all the women, the so-called black women, right? And this is exactly why, let me highlight this real quick, man. This is Isaiah chapter 32, in verse 9, it says, rise up ye women, right? Rise up you women that are at ease, right? Because a lot of you women, man, you think you cool, you straight, that you good, man. You got a little bit of money in your pocket. You're a woman. You got that thing between your legs, so you can really get whatever you want. Bat your eyes a little bit. Do something strange for some change, and you think you good, but nah, man. Trouble is coming, right? It says, hear my voice, ye careless daughters. Give ear unto my speech, right? Take heed. Scripture saying, Acts the 3rd chapter, the 23rd verse, that he that will not hear that prophet shall be destroyed from among the people. So you women need to listen, right? And take heed, because these times that are coming are only going to continue to get worse. It says, many days and years shall ye be troubled, ye careless women, for the vintage shall fail, and the gathering shall not come, right? You're not going to be able to get, your little treats and food and whatnot again, right? The elder Damasha Pot, right? Who was joined with another elder officer, young soldier, doing that video, was going into those food stands being cut off. A lot of you women are going to be in fucking straits, right? Verse 11, tremble you women that are at ease, be troubled, ye careless ones. Strip you and make you bare, and gird sackcloth upon your loins, man. When that day comes, man, and you women are going to be looking, right, for that help, right? You women are going to be looking, right, for that protection. All this, I don't need a man. I don't, I could do it by myself. Hey, that's some bullshit, man. That's that Western mindset, right? Majority of the women over in the East, in these other countries, they don't have that same mindset, right? It's the American woman, the Western woman, that got that mindset, which is going to be, her downfall, right? The woman that got that mindset is going to be your downfall, because, you had that mindset and ultimately done so many men bad, so many men, you've denied and treated like shit. Hey, well, those same men, the Lord very well could have, come and be the one that ravishes you, right? That come and kills your kids, steals your food, your water. Shit, hey, someone, they might not even ravish you. They might just leave you, right, hanging dry. And then the next one that comes and tries to, steal your food and water, finds out that your food and water ain't there, and then it's like, well, I'm gonna take you instead, So it could be days, weeks, it could be, days, without food and water, right? You just sitting there not knowing what to do, right? You might try to go out there, try to find food and water and get snatched up, you know? And that's all because of that wicked ass, I don't need a man mindset, man. You know? You women are going to be looking for that protection, and that protection is only going to be a man of the Lord, right? Not these average men out here, but the man of the Lord, you know? Let's jump to, and we'll come back, Isaiah 12 and 13? No, 13 and 12. It's like Isaiah 13 and 12, it says, and I will make a man more precious than fine gold, right? And this is talking about a man of the Lord, right? The man that has his wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, right? It says even a man than the golden wedge of Ophir, you know? That you women are going to ultimately be, you know, and you might run around and whatnot, and you see that every other person, right, is flipping out, wigging out, but this one man, right, and those who are with him, right, are cool, calm, and collected, right? Maybe not the women, but, you know, as far as the men, you know, that one man and maybe the other men that are around that believe, you know, are going to be cool, calm, and collected, man. You're going to ultimately desire to be with that man, you know. Again, pursuing Isaiah 4 and 1, right? Let's jump to that real quick. Isaiah 4 and 1, and in that day, 7 women, which the number 7 is a number of completion. It could be 100, it could be 200, you know. Could be 2, it could be 5, you know. Shall take hold of one man, saying, we will eat our own bread and wear our own apparel. Only let us be called by thy name to take away our reproach. So, you know, you can be going through it. You're going to see that man, you know, that's good, right, that the Lord is taking care of, and you're going to want to be with that man, you know. So this whole bullshit of, you know, oh, I don't do polygamy, this, that, and the third. You know, my man is supposed to be about me. That bullshit ass mentality, that Western ass mentality, and that shit gonna go away in that day, man. That, oh, I don't need a man, that shit gonna go away in that day. You know, because it's gonna be that man that is ultimately gonna be your protection, right? Let's go back to Isaiah 32 and verse 2. It says, a man, right, again, going back to that man of the Lord, right? It says, and a man shall be as a hiding place from the wind and a cover from the tempest, as rivers of water in a dry place, and as the shadow of a great rock in a weary land, right? So it's going to be that man that is going to be your protection, man. You know, that is going to be your covering in that day. You know, ultimately, right? It's going to be your Yahushai in that day, right? Your Savior in that day, right? Talking about the man of the Lord that the Lord ultimately guides you to, if the Lord guides you to that man. You know, if the Lord ultimately deems you worthy enough to be given unto, you know, to one of his men, or for one of his men to choose you, you know, because us men, we're going to have the pickings in that day. And of course, we're going to be guided through the spirit of Yahweh Bashim El Shai, right, on who to pick. The Lord is, you know, ultimately going to guide our mind into picking, you know, the woman that the Lord ultimately finds worthy. But nonetheless, you know, we're going to be able to see in that day, we're going to be able to see you for who you truly are. You know, a lot of you women are going to be fucked in that day, man. And this is, you know, really a warning to you women, right? You women better get right. You women better, you know, ultimately take heed to what's being spoken unto you and get right, right? And we understand that there's only a few women as of now that are really taking heed, right? But majority of you women are not going to listen, right? Majority of you women are going to be fucked in that day. You know, when all hell breaks loose, when shit hits the fan, you know, it's going to be over for you, you know, at that time, man, right? Unless Yahweh Bashim El Shai guides you to the men of the Lord, man, you know. And, you know, I'll close out with this in Acts 3 and 23, since I quoted it earlier, right? It says, and it shall come to pass that every soul which will not hear that prophet, right? And again, the prophets are out here speaking, and you know, on the highways and byways, doing videos throughout the week, right? Bringing out this information, warning you, right, of what's to come, right? It says, and it shall come to pass that every soul which will not hear that prophet, meaning you're not listening, right, shall be destroyed from among the people, you know. So if you don't want to listen, you want to, you know, scroll on by and, you know, scoff and mock at this word, and, oh, I don't need a man. No, I got my gun, I got my this, that, and the third. Okay, cool. You know, keep that same energy when that time comes, you know, because death is around the corner. right? And judgment from Yahweh Hashem El Shai is going out at an all-time high now. So how much more when that time comes? If you don't need a man now, keep that same energy, you know? But with that, Lord wills, edifying, Lord wills, straight to the point, I want to give all praise, honor, glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rechak, Wadash, double honor to the other apostles, at the bishops, great millstone. Till next time I say shalom.